So I think he was a bit of a social misfit. So he had a lot of pressure on his shoulders, and he couldn't cope with that pressure until he got involved with Lydia Robinson, and then it all went downbank. That was probably the beginning of the end for him. He wanted to prove the will of the human spirit. So when he knew the end was happening, he stood up and died on his feet. I am sat in the very spot that Branwell Bronte had his favourite chair in the Black Bull in Haworth, West Yorkshire. Just behind me is the fireplace that Branwell Bronte used to hold court. Legend has it that if any affluent travellers came through town, the landlord knew that he hadn't got the intellect to converse with these travellers, so he'd send a runner up to the parsonage to grab or send for Branwell Bronte, and he would come down here and have his drink paid for just so he could entertain the travelling guests. And they'd sit at this spot with a roaring fire and gin and bitter and while the night away. This became a little bit of a habit for Branwell, because he spent more time in here eventually than he did the parsonage. This was a little bit of a shame, really, because there was 4 kids in the house, four adults, 4 Bronte children. There was Branwell Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte and Anne Bronte. And of course the 3 girls were quite studious, and they were writing books. And sadly, Branwell Bronte just threw it all away. He was a gifted poet. He was a gifted artist, but he couldn't make it pay. He had a few poems published in Halifax and the surrounding areas, and he also had some paintings displayed, but I think he was okay. He was a better poet than he was a painter, and he was hoping to make a living out of painting, which was never going to happen. So alcohol, primarily at the Black Bull and at home, and laudanum from the apothecary store was where he retreated. So when life wasn't going his way, it was drink. Laudanum was completely legal back in those days, which was a mixture of alcohol and opiates, and it was perfectly okay. It was socially acceptable to buy that, and it was only outlawed in something like 1928. Can you believe? 1928. He got a job teaching some children in a large house with a well-respected and affluent family, and he had an affair with the lady of the house named Mrs. Robinson. And when the husband found out about this, he was booted out of the house in disgrace. But he was kind of in love with this woman, Lydia Robinson. And when he came back to Haworth in disgrace, lovelorn, penniless, it was then that alcohol and laudanum really took hold, and he was dead at the age of 31. But it was here in the Black Bull that he did a lot of his drinking. Lots of people walk past the Black Bull and don't realise the historical significance. I think it's quite funny, actually, that you've got the parsonage, and out of that parsonage came such great literary works. But it was the pub at the bottom of the lane that shaped all of their lives, because Branwell made their lives a living hell, and they did well despite him, despite the 4 of them growing up with such promise together. I've always thought that this pub was an unsung hero in the Haworth / Bronte story. If anybody walked in here that didn't realise about the Brontes or Haworth's history, it just looks like a really, really nice pub. And it is. I came here 10 years ago and it was horrible. They've spent a lot of money on this pub, and it's got a lovely atmosphere now. The bar staff are very, very, very friendly. The decor is fantastic. I wish they'd lit the fire though. there's a little bit of feedback. Light the fire at the Black Bull. I've often wished they would do a little bit more for tourists, because there's pubs not as nice as this that are full, and this one is not full. And I often think if they just did something a little bit touristy, have some memorabilia around the place, they could really improve this pub. The plaque outside is very possibly the world's most inaccurate commemoration plaque ever. They want to make a big deal of the fact that Branwell Bronte, the only brother of the Bronte sisters, frequented this pub. If the plaque is to be believed, he started drinking here at birth and attended Freemason meetings 35 years after his death. I've actually pointed it out to this pub many times that plaque is crazy. They never change it. I think they should keep it there now, because it every time I visit Haworth, it gives me something to talk about and moan about, so I like it for that reason. Let's have a closer look at this plaque outside, which commemorates the fact that Branwell Bronte did frequent this pub. Okay, this inn was frequented by Patrick Branwell Bronte from 1817 to 1848. Well, he was born in 1817 and he died in 1848, and he was born in Thornton, which is miles away. So it is technically possible that Patrick and Maria Bronte, the second they had their one and only son, regularly brought him to the Black Bull miles away at Haworth. But the second claim is a little bit harder to justify. In 1883, he was made secretary of the Freemasons Lodge at 3 Gracie's number 408, which met at this inn. Well, that's a little bit harder to get round, because he would have been dead for 35 years at that point. That's very possibly the world's most inaccurate commemorative plaque. The film To Walk Invisible, the BBC film To Walk Invisible, watch that film, it's amazing. It depicts the Black Bull really well, because it shows Branwell Bronte in the depths of despair when Lydia Robinson sent one of her staff on horseback to the Black Bull, and then they sent for him, and Branwell thought that there was a chance that once the old man of the house was dead, he could marry Lydia Robinson and start a new life. When he heard at the parsonage that there's a guy down at the Black Bull from Thorpe Green, he excitedly ran down here thinking, she wants to see me. But actually it was the opposite. It was a bloke saying, if you come anywhere near the mansion, you'll be shot. He wasn't wanted. And it was following that he had a huge decline in drink and drugs. It was around that time, in 1847, 1848, that the Bronte sisters started to get the attention of publishers, and their publishing journey actually began. And they had to keep that hidden from Branwell. Possibly one of the reasons why they kept it hidden from him was he would have felt very upset that he wasn't part of it, but also they didn't want him to ruin the chances for them. Back in Victorian times, if you had a family with girls and a boy, quite often all the energy of that family would be focused on the boy. It's the boy, it's the man that's going to make this family work. Anne, Charlotte and Emily looked to Branwell, and so did Patrick Bronte. They looked at Branwell and thought, well, let's put our focus and energy into this guy, because he's going to bring in the bacon. And of course, the complete opposite happened. There was a lot of pressure on Branwell Bronte's shoulders. He was an intellect, and he was very, very intelligent. He hadn't got much common sense, though. I think one of the things I love about history, not even history, it's about individuals from the past. It's how short a human lifespan is. It's tiny. 80, 90 years, it's nothing. I'm sat in the Black Bull here in Haworth. It's, I don't know, 400 years old. Looks like it was built yesterday. It's in absolutely fantastic condition. But we're flashes in the pan, aren't we? We're just organic material that come and go. This fireplace and the stone, that's going to be good in the next 400 years, but I'll be long gone. I might still be on YouTube at that point, but I will be long gone. I do like Branwell Bronte. I think the reason I like him is you've got a parsonage with, you've got the vicar is your dad. You've got 3 highly talented authors as sisters living in the house. In awe of you a little bit, because you're the bloke. You're the guy that's going to look after this family. And actually, you're the one, Branwell, you're the one that turns into a drug addict and alcoholic and throws it all away. Got sacked from every single job he was in and did nothing but bring shame on the family. Meanwhile, his 3 sisters turn into international best-selling authors of huge repute. We don't actually know if Branwell knew of their success. We don't know. I actually hope he didn't know about it. Well, he was dead actually before most of the success happened. But can you imagine how crushing it would have been for him? The Black Bull in Haworth. One of the most interesting pubs in the United Kingdom that nobody's heard of. Even people that come to Haworth walk past this place and don't realise the significance in the story of English literature. Had Branwell not become a drug addict and an alcoholic and spent all his time in here, it may be that the Bronte sisters didn't put pen to paper. Would they have sought a publishing deal? Because they realised that actually, if we don't get a publishing deal and earn some money, when their dad is dead, they'll be kicked out of the parsonage and they'll be homeless. So they had to do something about it. So Branwell Bronte and this pub played a role in that story. I wish I could go back in a little time capsule and look at Branwell Bronte dressed in Victorian attire, sat at this spot, warming himself by the fire, drinking gin, drinking bitter, and talking in his intellectual way to people in the pub at the time. So I think he was a bit of a social misfit. So he had a lot of pressure on his shoulders and he couldn't cope with that pressure. That's what led him to drink and drugs. But he managed his drink and drugs okay until he got involved with Lydia Robinson, and then it all went downbank. That was probably the beginning of the end for him. An interesting thing about Branwell Bronte, he died standing up. He wanted to prove the will of the human spirit. So when he knew the end was happening, he stood up and died on his feet. I don't know if that's true, but that's what's been reported and that's what's been written, that he died standing up. I think if you know some personalities and a little bit about somebody not that long ago, because really 1840, 1845, 1848, that's not that long ago. It's 180 spins around the sun. What would he make of the place now? If Branwell Bronte was dragged out of the crypt in Haworth Church and you brought him into the Black Bull now, he'd recognise that fireplace. He'd recognise the outside of the pub. He'd wonder what the sign is for free Wi-Fi with the Wi-Fi password. He won't recognise the electric lights and the modern appearance. I'm sure the pub he knew was dark. It had candles on the walls, sawdust on the floors, a huge variety of about 2 bitters and a row of gins. That's what would have been available to him then. I do sometimes wonder what people from the past would make of today. Can you imagine it? Where would you start? If they came back, how would you explain how we've arrived at this? But the interesting thing is the actual pub is exactly the same. You find a photograph of the Black Bull from the turn of the century, it's the same. It hasn't changed. That's another thing I love about Haworth. It's 99% the same as it was in the mid-Victorian period, the early Victorian period, 1845 to 1850. It's exactly the same. But people don't die at 22 anymore. That's been a huge improvement. You could argue that this pub is a little bit too decorated. It's a little bit too modern. I kind of wish it was a spit and sawdust place like it was in 1845. But it's well worth a visit. Black Bull in Haworth. The drinking place of Branwell Bronte, brother of the Bronte sisters.